In this video, we are going to talk about optional chaining, a new feature introduced in ECMAScript 2020 that allow us to safely access deep object properties without having to manually check for the existing of intermediate properties. First, let's take a look at how we will normally access deep object properties in the JavaScript. For example, we have this object. To access the street property of this object, we will write a code console.log, and normally we can say person.address which is have a street basically, or let me take it out this street option, and we can say street. It will give us 123 Main Street. However, if this address object or the street property does not exist, this code will throw an error. To avoid this error, we will need to manually check for the existing of the address object and the street property before trying to access them. Let me give an example. For example, if we are going to check console log, and then we can say person dot phone, and the phone should have a property of number, correct? If we run now, so it will give us an error, and that's basically we are going back to the object and check again manually is this property is available or not. So for that purpose, we are going to use optional chaining JavaScript, which can allow us to give us undefined. And how we can do that? So using optional chaining, we can safely access the street property of the address object or the phone property of the object without having to manually check for the existence. So if either address, street, or the phone property does not exist, the optional chaining operator, this operator means optional chaining, will return undefined instead of throwing an error. Let me show you how we can do that. If you can see right now, it's showing us undefined. So the first one is 123 street with the following console log, and the second one is undefined, showing us before it was giving us an error. So that's how comes we can use optional chaining JavaScript, this question mark operator, to identify whether this object has this property available or not. Second, we can use this in arrays. And how we can do that? So let me show you. Suppose we have one array which is called have a 3 object 1 2 3, and there is another array which is undefined, doesn't have any value. Okay, so let me give array 2. Sorry, normally when we access, so console log, and we're calling array, and we can call like this directly to say number 2 value. Let's first run this again. You can see number 2 value has coming 3, which is here 0 1 and 2, so that's the value. But if we access console.log and we don't know array 2 has value or not, and we all call also array 2 and also calling give us the value of the arrays, the value of 2. So if we call again, it will give us our error because array 2 doesn't have any property assigned. So for that purpose, we can use here also option, and then we can use dot, and we can check and we can tell the JavaScript, okay, this is optional trading, please find out if that exists to give us a value, otherwise tell us is undefined. So now if I run again this, you will see this 3 is for the first array and it's showing us undefined. So we will know, we developers will know, oh, that property is not exist. So let's make it, instead of checking all the way, go back in your code somewhere and you can need to find out is this object is exist or not. We can also use optional chaining in function call or either in our promises. So let me show you how we can use this in our function. So for example, we have one function which we can call like a get person. Okay, now I'm gonna be written a code, maybe not say something, which will give us return an object. I have a name and I'm gonna call name like John, and the John has age which is 30, and that's we're gonna get an object from the function. So for example, like when we're going to calling this in a function, so function, how you gonna call here, like get person, correct? And get person dot name. So first let me run this to show you how it's gonna. So we getting only person. We can see here only person because I did mistake here to run as a function. It's a function, so we're gonna call in console log as a function. Calling again, and you can see we get the value of John. So John is came here. Let me a little bit bigger this. You can see John. Now what if we calling here instead of name, we calling here phone? Or for example, if we calling here address of this object, if we run again, we will get here undefined because get person doesn't have property of address. But what if we're calling nested, because optional chaining is using for nesting deep, what is called, you can go deep checking. So it's for deep checking. Address should have street object, correct? Street property, sorry. So now if I'm going to access again, you will see we getting an error. Okay, first this object doesn't have street property. Usually you can access single property but not a deep property. So how we can do that? We will check telling them, and you can call this as an optional and tell us if that exists or not. So we will get this as undefined. So that's pretty useful for a big project or a lot of question, a lot of arrays, objects we defining and we don't know it. We're going back to back to check how is this property is available or inside this property is available. So we can easily implement like dot dot and street, and it will be defined as a value. We can easily give them a value. Let me show you in the as a promise how we can use this as a promise. So I'm going to write another function which is called get person async. Okay, basically a promise, is a async. It's another discussion about promises. So I'm not going to discuss how to write the promise or something, but I'm gonna just show you how this will. We're gonna call a simple JavaScript this for promise, and the promise, because promise we're gonna say reject and resolve. So we are going to resolve function, which is resolve function, which will takes we're gonna give them an object in this resolve which is have name. Okay, like I say, I'm not going to explain this because it's a totally different subject. So you can check my promise video where you can see all about this JavaScript promises. And the next video I'm also going to get another promises of all settle, which will be video will come soon. So right now we create one function which will be return a promise if we solve this object. So let's call a promise function, correct? So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna say get person async. This is the function. And this function when we calling, so the promise has function like dot then. What we will do dot then is basically calling person. Okay, we has a person. We're calling a person because this is a person object. So we're calling a person and going to return some console logging. So we should know what we are going to get it. Correct? So basically this is a promises. So instead of person and dot, for example, I'm just going to show you how we can do that. Like if I'm going to promise giving us person should have an address and the street, and this should run. So let's see how it's gonna be work. Okay, if you can see, we're getting an error of console log person dot street dot address because we are not running this promise is getting running. So type error cannot read the property of undefined, which is giving us that error. But same if we're going to use a question mark here, as like we use in our simple function, and this is returning from. So let's check how gonna be the result. So the result is same as undefined. So optional chaining, we can safely access properties of an object that is the result of function call or a promise without having to manually check for existence of the object or its properties. So that's it for optional chaining in JavaScript. I hope this video helped you to understand how to use optional chaining to safely access deep objects, properties, and elements of an array without having to manually check for their existence. Thank you.